They started laughing before she even reached her seat. Not the polite kind of laugh people use to hide discomfort. No, this was the sharp, cutting laughter of people who believe the world exists to entertain them. Business class hummed with the sound of clinking glasses, low conversation, and the soft purr of a jet engine. And through it all rose that sound. Entitled amusement aimed at a single black woman standing in the aisle with a worn carry-on and a boarding pass clutched in her hand like a lifeline. "Excuse me," the blonde woman in 12B said loudly, looking her up and down. "I think you're in the wrong cabin. Business is up here. Economy's back there." She pointed her manicured thumb over her shoulder, letting the gesture hang like an insult. Her husband chuckled, adjusting his designer watch. "You sure they didn't print that wrong, sweetheart? Those budget airlines mess up all the time." A few passengers smirked. Others watched with thin, tight smiles. The kind rich people wear when they know something mean is happening but don't want to get their hands dirty by stopping it. The cabin, bathed in soft amber light, felt suddenly colder. The black woman, Maya, checked her boarding pass again, even though she already knew it by heart. 12A business class. Her hands were steady, but her skin burned under their gaze. The flight attendant approached, already wearing that tight smile she reserved for difficult situations. "Ma'am," the attendant said, voice syrupy smooth. "Can I see your boarding pass for a moment?" The blonde woman leaned back, took a sip of champagne, and said to no one in particular, "They really need to monitor who they let up here. It ruins the experience when people treat business like a free-for-all." Maya handed over her ticket without a word. The attendant scanned it with a small device. There was a little beep. The attendant's expression shifted. "Oh," she said. You're in 12A, right here." The blonde woman laughed out loud. "You're serious? That has to be a glitch." "No, ma'am," the attendant said, a nervous edge in her voice. "She's booked in this cabin." Her husband scoffed. "Business must be doing a promo." Someone in 11C chuckled. A man in 10A turned to stare, unabashed. The humiliation wasn't subtle. It was a performance, a show, and the entire cabin had front-row seats. Maya slid her bag into the overhead compartment and sat down quietly in 12A. Her sweater was plain. Her braids were pulled back in a neat bun. No designer handbag, no flashy watch. Just a small leather notebook and a pair of headphones, with one side taped where the plastic had cracked. She could feel the heat in her cheeks, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Have you ever walked into a room and felt, in your bones, that everyone had already decided your worth before you said a single word? Business class was an airborne country club. The kind of space built to make certain people feel chosen and everyone else feel like an intruder. The seats were wide, like thrones. The champagne was poured before takeoff. The menus read like a 5-star restaurant. Every detail whispered a message. This is not for you, unless you paid the price to be here. The people around her behaved like they owned the sky. Men in navy suits tapped on sleek laptops, gossiping about deals and mergers. Women showed off vacation pictures from villas on their phones, comparing diamonds the way kids compare stickers. An older man bragged loudly about the number of miles he'd flown up here and how he couldn't go back to coach because his back refused to suffer. And then there was the couple in 12B and 12C, Victoria and Richard Clark. Victoria was the kind of woman who looked expensive before she even opened her mouth. Hair styled to perfection, nails painted a meticulous nude, diamond tennis bracelet catching the cabin lights. Her voice carried, each sentence shaped to be overheard. Richard wore wealth like a second skin. Custom blazer, gold cufflinks, a watch that quietly screamed old money. They talked about the help, like they weren't surrounded by flight attendants doing emotional gymnastics to keep them placated. "I swear," Victoria said as the flight attendant walked away. "They're letting anyone into premium these days. First that noisy family in the lounge, now this." Richard shrugged. "Doesn't matter. She'll probably pass out and sleep the whole flight. It's always the ones who splurge once a year that act like they own the place." Maya slid her notebook onto the tray table. She didn't look at them, didn't respond. She just opened to a page filled with tight, neat handwriting and complex symbols most people would mistake for scribbles. They saw a cheap sweater and a beat-up notebook. They didn't see the mind behind it. Maya Daniels had never had the luxury of being average. Her parents came to the country with 2 suitcases, 3 kids, and a hope that didn't match their bank account. Her mother scrubbed floors at office buildings whose names she couldn't pronounce. Her father worked warehouse shifts that left his back permanently bent. Money was always an emergency. Maya grew up translating bills and legal letters for her parents before she was old enough to drive. She knew what debt smelled like, tasted like, felt like. A constant pressure on the chest. So she became obsessed with systems, numbers, connections. If she couldn't control the world, she would at least understand the rules it was playing by. She devoured math, code, patterns, online forums full of people who spoke in algorithms and encryption keys. She found beauty in security systems, in the invisible locks that protected things other people took for granted. At 16, she stopped a scammer from draining her father's bank account by reverse tracing the phishing link and reporting it directly to the hosting provider with detailed logs. At 19, she wrote a piece of code that blocked an entire category of cyber attacks on her university's network. At 24, she was working behind the scenes for agencies that never said their names out loud. But none of that showed on her boarding pass. The plane lifted smoothly into the night, engines roaring softly as they climbed through layers of cloud. The cabin dimmed. Ambient light glowed around the curved walls. Flight attendants glided by with silver trays, pouring more drinks, handing out hot towels. Maya put in one earbud, but left the other out. She was used to listening, really listening, even when people assumed she wasn't paying attention. Her notebook lay open to a page full of network diagrams. On the margin, she had scribbled a reminder about a briefing at the UN's Cybersecurity Council in 2 days. She had chosen this flight because she needed sleep before the storm. Rest, however, was not something the world liked to give her. An hour into the flight, panic cracked the calm. A man from first class stumbled into their cabin, voice shaking. "Is there anyone who speaks Mandarin? Please, my colleague. He's having some sort of reaction and the instructions in the medical kit." "They're all in Mandarin." Heads turned, seatbelts unclicked. A murmur of fear spread like electricity. A flight attendant rushed to the man. "We're trying to reach our multilingual crew in economy, but the aisle is blocked with a service cart. Is there anyone here who can help interpret?" Silence. Passengers suddenly found great interest in their screens, their glasses, their blankets. A couple of businessmen glanced around but stayed seated. The international cabin, full of people who flew to Singapore, Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, couldn't muster a single response. Victoria rolled her eyes. "This airline is slipping," she said. "No backup?" The man's voice cracked. He can't breathe. That did it. Maya was out of her seat before she realized she'd moved. She stepped into the aisle, heart steady, mind already calculating. "I can read it," she said. The desperate man blinked. You speak Mandarin?" "Enough," she replied. 30 seconds later, she was in first class, kneeling beside a man whose face was starting to swell, chest heaving in labored breaths. Another passenger held the medical kit, panic shaking his hands. The instruction leaflet was covered in characters no one else recognized. Maya took it. Her eyes scanned the text with the speed of someone who'd been reading Mandarin technical documents for years. "Not this one," she said quickly, pushing aside a red injector. "That will make it worse if it's an allergic reaction. Use the blue one. It's a fast-acting epinephrine analog. Here." She snapped the cap off, handed it firmly to the man. "Into the thigh, through the clothes, now." He obeyed. Gasps rippled through the cabin. The needle went in. The patient twitched, then shuddered, then dragged in a ragged breath. His airway began to open. Color slowly crept back into his cheeks. The flight attendants exhaled as one. "You just saved his life," one whispered. The man who had fetched her grabbed her hand with both of his. "Thank you. Xie. Thank you." First class, people who thought they'd seen everything there was to see, stared at her like they'd never seen anything like her in their lives. Maya gave them a small nod, handing the leaflet back. "You should still have paramedics meet us when we land," she said, "and check his medical records. He may not know he has this allergy." The chief flight attendant looked at her like she was seeing a ghost. "How did you—" "Long story," Maya said softly. When she walked back through the curtain to business class, the air had changed. The same passengers who'd watched her earlier like she was trespassing now parted without a word. A woman in 11C murmured, "God bless you." A man in 10A straightened up and avoided her eyes. Victoria stared at her as if she'd grown another head. You read that?" Victoria asked, disbelief sharpening her voice. "Like, actually read it?" Maya buckled her seatbelt. "Yes." "Where did you learn Mandarin?" Richard demanded. "Some app?" Maya smiled faintly. "No. Work." They didn't know what to say to that. The rest of the flight passed in uneasy quiet. The crew checked on her several times, asking if she needed anything, offering extra desserts, better wine. She declined, choosing water and the last few pages of notes she needed to review. When the plane touched down at JFK, there was a small round of applause. Not for a safe landing. No, that old cliché was gone. This was quieter, scattered, but real. People glanced at Maya as they clapped. Some nodded, a few tried to catch her eye. Victoria did not clap. She was too busy trying to undo the image of the woman she had mocked, doing something neither she nor her husband could have done with all their money. At the gate, passengers lined up to exit. Maya waited, not in a rush, letting those with tight connections scramble ahead. Victoria and Richard ended up in front of her in the jet bridge, dragging expensive carry-ons, muttering about time zones and meetings. When they reached the terminal doors, the cool air hit, filled with that unique airport smell. Fuel, coffee, and stress. People scattered toward baggage claim, connecting flights, ride shares. And then the black SUV glided up to the curb. Not just any SUV. This one was the kind with tinted windows, diplomatic plates, and a driver in a dark suit who carried himself like he was trained to notice threats before they formed. He stepped out, scanned the crowd once, then zeroed in on her. "Miss Daniels?" he called, voice crisp. Victoria and Richard both turned instinctively. Maya lifted her head. The driver nodded and opened the back door with a slight bow of respect. "Your vehicle is ready. The council is assembled and awaiting your arrival downtown. They asked me to tell you the cyber briefing is our top priority." Victoria's mouth dropped open. Richard blinked. "Cyber briefing?" The driver looked at them briefly, then back at Maya like they were background noise. "We're wheels up in 10, ma'am, if we're going to make it before the ministers join the call." Maya adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. She could feel Victoria's stare burning into the side of her face. "You work with ministers?" Victoria asked, incredulous. "As in government?" Maya tilted her head, really seeing them now, not just as tormentors, but as symbols of something bigger. The people who believed ownership of the world came baked into their skin tone and credit limit. "I do," she said evenly. "Cybersecurity strategy, international systems, the UN meets today. I'm presenting risk mitigation protocols." The words went over most people's heads, not because they were complicated, but because they were unimaginable coming from her. From the woman they had decided didn't belong in business class. Richard swallowed. His voice came out strangled. "You mean like hacking and stuff?" Maya's eyes crinkled just slightly. "Something like that." For a second, a flicker of petty satisfaction flashed in her chest. Not revenge, just balance. The universe recalibrating itself in real time. "Thank you for your help on the flight," the man from 10A said suddenly, stepping forward. His voice was genuine. His gaze was steady. "You saved that guy's life. I misjudged you. I'm sorry." Others murmured in agreement. A small circle of witnesses, suddenly aware of their own complicity. Victoria's lips trembled like she wanted to apologize, but didn't have the language for it. Entitlement hadn't taught her how to say, "I was wrong about you," without choking. Maya didn't need her apology to breathe. "If you'll excuse me," she said, turning toward the SUV. She paused at the open door and looked back over her shoulder, not cruel, not gloating, just undeniably seen. "Next time you decide who belongs in a space," she said quietly, "maybe wait until you know what they carry that money can't buy." Then she ducked into the SUV. The door shut with a soft, final click. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb and merged into the flow of traffic, the airport shrank behind her. Inside, the world she was driving toward loomed large. Conference rooms full of flags, men and women with titles and responsibilities that could shift entire economies, screens lit with threat maps and live feeds. It would be a long day. Nations did not secure themselves. But in the back of that car, for a brief moment, she let herself remember being 13 years old, sitting at a kitchen table covered in overdue bills, listening to her parents argue in hushed, tired voices about which utilities they could afford to keep. She had promised herself then, "I will learn the rules they use to crush us. I will learn them so well, no one can ever play me again." This black SUV, this city skyline, this invitation to the table where the real decisions were made, wasn't an accident. It was the price of every night she stayed up studying instead of sleeping. Every time she bit her tongue when someone took credit for her work. Every moment she swallowed anger because survival demanded it. 2 days later, she saw Victoria and Richard again. It was at a high-security briefing in a private midtown tower, one of those buildings with more surveillance than windows. Their hedge fund had been hit by a sophisticated cyber attack. Millions at risk. Data leaking. The government was involved because their firm handled sensitive infrastructure investments. They walked into the room red-faced, rattled out of their depth. At the head of the long table, a large screen displayed lines of code and breach alerts. Officials murmured in low voices. The atmosphere was tense, suffocating, high stakes. The chair at the center, facing the screen, was empty. Until the door opened, and Maya walked in. The room fell silent. The lead investigator stood. "This is Maya Daniels," he said. "She's overseeing the task force. She's the one leading the incident response." Victoria made a small choking sound. Richard whispered, "You've got to be kidding." She wasn't. Maya sat at the head of the table, her posture relaxed, but her eyes all steel. She flipped open her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. The screen updated in real time as she spoke. "Here's what we know," she said. "You've been under a slow drip infiltration for 6 months. They mapped your weak points through your third-party vendors, then escalated access during your last software update. You never saw it because you trust your perimeter more than your internal signals." The jargon hit like gunfire. The officials nodded. They understood the stakes. They understood her. Richard raised a shaking hand. So what does that mean for us?" Maya met his eyes. "It means," she said calmly, "you've been lucky. They could have wiped you out already. Instead, they tested your alarms. They wanted to see how long you'd stay blind." He shrank in his seat. She launched into the recovery plan. Precise, strategic, ruthless. Network isolation, forensic analysis, patch deployment, regulatory disclosures. She spoke with the confidence of someone who knew her field better than they knew their own reflection. At one point, Victoria tried to speak. "We can't let this leak," she said. "Our reputation." "Your reputation," Maya cut in smoothly, "will suffer more if you pretend this didn't happen and it leaks anyway. Transparency is your only leverage now." The official from the regulatory body nodded. "She's right." Maya continued, her voice never rising, but the weight of it filled the room. And somewhere in the middle of her briefing, something shifted behind Victoria's eyes. The mockery was gone. The disdain evaporated. In its place was a kind of stunned realization, a wide-eyed recognition. The woman she had laughed at in a plane seat, the one she'd tried to shove back into an invisible corner of the world, that woman was now the only person standing between her husband's empire and total collapse. When the meeting adjourned hours later, the room emptied slowly. Officials filed out. Tech teams set up in side rooms. The crisis was far from over, but the path forward was drawn. Victoria drifted toward Maya like someone approaching a confession booth. "Maya?" she said, voice small, no champagne, no audience, no performance. Maya closed her laptop and looked up. "Yes. Victoria swallowed hard. "I was wrong about you, on the plane. I said things I'm ashamed of. I looked at you and decided you didn't belong near me, when clearly I'm the one who doesn't belong near your level of whatever this is." Maya held her gaze for a long moment. She saw the fear there, the ego, the shame, the confusion of someone whose worldview had been cracked open. "It's not about levels," Maya said quietly. "It's about lenses. You looked at me through one that was too small." Victoria's eyes glistened. "Can you forgive me?" Maya inhaled slowly. "I don't carry you," she said. "I carry what I owe my people, my family, my younger self. You're background noise compared to that. If you want to make this mean something, don't grovel." Change how you look at the next black woman you see who isn't dressed the way you expect. The words landed with a thud of truth. Victoria nodded slowly. I will, she whispered. I swear I will. Maya stood, gathering her things. Good. Because the next one you underestimate might not be there to save your husband's firm. She walked past her, out into the corridor, where the world kept spinning, servers buzzing, alerts chiming, people hustling to fix what others broke. And that, right there, is the lesson buried beneath the glamour, beneath the jets and the champagne and the black SUVs. Dignity is not something the world hands you with a warm towel and a glass of sparkling wine. It is something you hold inside yourself when they laugh, when they doubt, when they point at you in aisles and say, "You don't belong here." Being underestimated doesn't shrink your talent. It only shrinks their vision. So the next time you see a black woman in a place you didn't expect her to be, business class, a boardroom, the head of the table in a crisis room, don't ask yourself, how did she get here? Ask yourself, what am I finally seeing that's been there all along? Because one day, like Maya, the person they mocked in public will step into the car, into the room, into the role that proves what was true from the beginning. She didn't need their permission to belong. She was the one holding the keys the whole time.